Well, it looks like the U.S. Surgeon General is now calling for censorship of what the White House and powers that be would call misinformation. And as we know, it's not always misinformation, or at least misinformation is not always false information, but it is just information that they don't want you to know about. We have become a one narrative nation, unfortunately. So let's take a look at this NPR report. The U.S. Surgeon General is calling COVID-19 misinformation and urgent threat, is the Surgeon General. So this is somebody who is for our health, and they're saying that this misinformation that's circulating around the web is urgent for our health. It's a threat. With about a third of adults in the U.S. still completely unvaccinated and cases of COVID-19 on the rise, the U.S. Surgeon General is calling for a war against health misinformation. On Thursday, Dr. Vivek Murthy released the first Surgeon General's advisory of his time serving in the Biden administration, describing the urgent threat posed by the rise of false information around COVID-19, one that continues to put lives at risk and prolong the pandemic. Murthy says Americans must do their part to fight misinformation. In some cases, he says, the simplest way to stop the spread is to not share something questionable you read online. Quote, if you're not sure, not sharing is often the prudent thing to do. Okay. Goes on to say, but Murthy also wants to see action on a larger scale. In his advisory, he puts pressure on big tech companies to play a bigger role in combating health misinformation on their platforms. He wants to see algorithms tweaked to further demote bad information and companies to share more data with outside researchers and the government. What? Quote, the tech companies actually have a much better sense of how much misinformation is being transacted on their platforms, and without understanding the full extent of it, it's hard to formulate the most effective strategies, he says. The new Surgeon General's advisory comes as welcome news to Imran Ahmed, the chief executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, a group that tracks COVID-19 misinformation online. But Ahmed also says that asking individual Americans to fight misinformation won't be enough. His group has identified a dozen major spreaders of vaccine misinformation, and many continue to operate unchecked on social media. Quote, at our last count, 30 of 89 social media accounts for those 12 people have been taken down. But that means 59 are still up, he says. They've still got millions of viewers being pumped misinformation and lies on a daily basis. Social media companies profiting off of clicks are spreading misinformation faster than can be countered, Ahmed says. He'd like to see the Surgeon General exert even more pressure on those companies. All right, so let's break this down. First of all, when the Surgeon General says that tech companies actually have a much better sense of how much misinformation is being transacted on their platforms, is that really true? What we know is that big tech has been censoring even doctors, medical doctors, people who are actual experts in their field are being censored by big tech. So it's one thing if big tech is going to try and censor somebody who is peddling snake oil, right? If they say, well, this person is really dangerous because they're saying that you can be cured from drinking this like saline solution type thing, then that person needs to be censored because it's harmful to people. Okay. Maybe we could all agree that that might be a reason to censor, that maybe you'd want to put fact checks or information on snake oil salesmen. But when you start to label actual medical scientists who are the frontline doctors treating COVID, who are the inventor of mRNA vaccines, Dr. Robert Malone, he was censored by LinkedIn. They actually removed the inventor of mRNA vaccines from LinkedIn for a period of time. They also removed Dr. Pierre Corey, who is a frontline doctor working with patients in ICUs, treating COVID patients. They removed him from LinkedIn as well, not to mention Dr. Pierre Corey's testimony to the Senate. So actual congressional hearings were censored by YouTube. Dr. Brett Weinstein from the Dark Horse podcast has been censored. Dr. Chris Martenson from Peak Prosperity has been censored. All of the frontline doctors and urgent care doctors in Bakersfield, remember those doctors that were talking about masks? They've been censored. Several ICU doctors. Remember that very first doctor who actually was going on the internet when everyone was talking about ventilators, that we need ventilators, we have to manufacture ventilators. And there was that one emergency ICU doctor who said, I don't think that's it. This looks like it's in the blood. This is causing like altitude sickness. So this is the symptoms are not looking respiratory. They're looking like the blood is not getting enough oxygen. He was censored, removed. His videos were constantly taken down. And yet now we know the ventilators weren't nearly as helpful as treating maybe the blood issues. We're seeing that now as time has gone on, we found that actually that ICU doctor was really onto something in the very beginning, but he was censored for saying such things. So my question is, does big tech really know? Do they have a much better sense of how much misinformation is actually out there? Can they tell what is misinformation, what is false information, I should say, and what is just unknown information, speculating, having conversation, dialogue, saying, hey, this person is saying one thing, this person is saying another. It's all brand new to all of us. So we all deserve to hear everything that there is to know because it's all brand new. Nothing is set in stone yet. This is new. The whole thing's new. So having the Surgeon General say, well, we need big tech to step in and they have a better sense of what misinformation is. I'm not sure what credentials Mark Zuckerberg has, but he certainly doesn't have the credentials of Dr. Robert Malone or Dr. Pierre Corey or any of these other doctors who have been speaking about the unknowns or even some of the scientific research that has come out. We have various scientific studies that are not able to be actually discussed because it's against community guidelines. So does big tech actually know? We've had numerous examples of now once censored content that is now okay. Right? They said, oh, no, you cannot hear about that. But now it's okay. The lab leak theory was one. I personally had a video removed regarding the lab leak theory. Big tech decided that it wasn't okay for me to speculate about that possibility. I wasn't even really fully speculating on it. I was reporting on the fact that people were speculating on it. And nonetheless, that was removed by big tech. They said that was not okay. Now it's okay to talk about. We all know that vitamin D, that was another one. I had a vitamin D video censored saying that vitamin D seemed to be helpful until the science came out showing that actually vitamin D seemed to be helpful. Hunter Biden, we all know that story. So it's not just about COVID. We're seeing all kinds of content being censored. The Hunter Biden story, U.S. elections. You're not allowed to discuss the U.S. elections in any way, shape, or form. Essentially, when it comes to questioning U.S. elections, you cannot do that. You can, however, question the legitimacy of pretty much any other country's election. That's the odd thing about this. You can talk about any other country. You can even accuse other countries of having sham elections, but you cannot discuss it, not even defend our elections here in the United States. We saw that back in February when dozens of leftist channels were removed from YouTube, were demonetized because they were questioning the election. Even if they were defending the integrity of the U.S. elections, they still were removed or demonetized by big tech. So do they really have a good sense? Are they really the best judge of what is false information? Now, I've had some people combat me on this and they say, no, Kim, you cannot speculate. You're not allowed to speculate. Once it's fact, then you can talk about it. But you can't talk about it until it's fact. How dangerous is this mindset? The entire purpose of journalism, of the protection of freedom of the press, is in order for the journalists and the press to speculate, to make accusations even against the government, the powers that be, to say, hey, these are the things that we're not sure about. We are questioning this. That is the entire premise of freedom of the press. Freedom of the press is not freedom if you're not allowed to speak until it is verified by the government as true. That is the exact opposite of freedom of the press. And we're seeing this attack on the press. We're seeing this attack on information that it's only allowed if certified by the U.S. government. How is this not more alarming to more people? What is really frightening for me is to see so many people that I maybe even once respected and adored, like AOC, for example, suddenly turn and become completely authoritarian in their views when it comes to stopping the spread of misinformation, saying, no, we want big tech to go and silence people until it is authorized by us, the government, as true information. It cannot be said. That is so fundamentally anti-freedom, fundamentally anti-democracy, anti-freedom of the press. It is disgusting to me. In fact, I don't know how anybody can how anybody can actually support any politician who advocates for this, even if you agree with all of their other positions. This is so antithetical to democracy. It is dangerous, truly dangerous. Now, the reality is big tech censors information that just goes against their allies. It is not really about censoring information that is dangerous information. When I first started my YouTube channel, I was seeing a trend in my demonetization. Now, I pretty much knew that I would have videos demonetized that were about terrorism and war. Advertisers maybe don't want to put their ads when you're talking about things that are really gruesome. Even though Fox News can do it, CNN can do it, but me as an independent person, if I talk about those kinds of things, they would demonetize those videos. That was somewhat understandable. What I found really alarming and interesting was that they would also censor any video that I did that criticized Nancy Pelosi. That was really strange to me. Now, plenty of other YouTubers are obviously criticizing Nancy Pelosi. Ben Shapiro criticizes Nancy Pelosi all the time. So why is it that my videos would be demonetized criticizing her? And the only plausible explanation that I have been given by anybody who kind of is in the know is they say that because my audience was primarily leftist at the time, now my audience has shifted over time, but at the time, my audience was mostly progressive leftist, that it was too disruptive to the base to talk about Nancy Pelosi in a negative way. So it's one thing if Republicans do it to Republican audiences, they already know they're not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. But if I myself, somebody who's drawing in voters who may be voting for Nancy Pelosi, and I somehow turn them away from her, that's considered too disruptive. And that was demonetized and that was limited. So was it false information? It absolutely was not false information. They also have since done that to my channel in regards to reporting on Joe Biden. Anything critical of Joe Biden was, for a while there, during the election in particular, not as much anymore, but during the election, it was demonetized and shadow banned. Essentially, what they do is they just don't recommend the video to anybody. So the reality is big tech is not censoring information that is truly harmful to people. They're not actually doing this out of the goodwill or in the best interest of the American public. They're doing it in the best interest of their allies very specifically. Silicon Valley is deep blue. They censor negative information about anybody who is on the blue side, speaking to blue audiences. That's what they're doing. The media remains completely silent when there is something negative about a Democrat. They only start talking about it when it just becomes too loud, that they cannot ignore it. We saw this with Tara Reade and Joe Biden. How long did it take CNN to report on that? How long did it take? It took 2 weeks. It took CNN 2 weeks before they finally whispered one word about Tara Reade and her accusations against Joe Biden. We're seeing that again even today. How many people have heard today about the Democratic rep, Brad Schneider from Illinois, who is being accused of making racist remarks against one of his black staffers? Is that making all the news rounds today? That would make an enormous amount of noise if that were a Republican. But because that's a Democrat who makes a racist remark, it's not as newsworthy to the hyper blue media that is allied with the Democratic Party. Now, earlier this week, alarm bells went off when Politico reported on the White House looking to work with SMS providers to censor COVID misinformation texts. I'm sure you've heard this story. Extremely alarming. Highly believable, right? In this era, had you thought this or said this a couple of years ago, it would seem totally and completely ridiculous. The government would not be reading our text messages. They would not then be sending out, this is misinformation. We see these posts already on Facebook. We see these on Twitter when there's somebody who posts something and then the algorithms for big tech, they say, oh no, this is misinformation. They put like a warning label on it and you have to click through the warning label before you can see what somebody in your family or friend posted on Facebook. So the thought was this was going to happen to our text messages. If somebody texts you something about the virus or the election or Hunter Biden or whoever it might be, and it is deemed by big tech as misinformation, they would then potentially put this label on your text or maybe even eliminate your text from being viewed altogether. That set off alarm bells, obviously. Well, now there's been more clarity from the reporter, because this was from Politico. There's been more clarity from the reporter, but honestly, the clarity isn't any more comforting. So this is what the reporter went on to say when questioned about this. So a person wrote, "I think you buried the lead in your story. DNC reading text messages is pretty damn scary." The reporter wrote, "As the story points out, it's allied private groups that are working with SMS carriers, not the White House. Even then, there is no ability for groups to read individual texts aside from the ones they receive themselves." Okay, so she says, as the story points out, it's allied private groups that are working with SMS carriers. Who is an allied private group? Because Google seems to be an allied private group. Twitter seems to be an allied private group, right? Big tech is private and allied with the Democratic Party, clearly. So can they read the individual text messages? Maybe not. But their algorithms potentially can suss out certain words, and then those words would then have warnings on them. We're seeing that already as it is. Do you think Facebook officials are sitting there reading every single Facebook post you put out there in real time as you post it? Yet right now, when you write up something about COVID, it immediately gets a warning label on it. Immediately. The algorithm does that. So even if they're not the ones reading your individual text messages, their algorithms potentially could be doing some sort of, when you're sending a text, it's going over all kinds of technology that we can't understand, right? Somebody built it. They program it to where if I send something from my device, it suddenly shows up on yours. It's amazing. It's miraculous. It's incredible technology. And of course, it's being monitored in one way, shape, or another. So even if it's an algorithm monitoring it, or if it's the NSA, could be one or the other, to be honest with you. But this is not any more comforting to say that, well, it's allied private groups. That is what's happening in social media. It isn't the government specifically going around censoring Dr. Pierre Corey or Dr. Robert Malone or Brett Weinstein or any of these others. It's not the government doing it. It's these allied private groups. That's the problem. That is the very problem. Another person tweeted at her, "Just so we're clear, the government is going to monitor my text to make sure I don't say something they don't like." And she writes back, "No, outside groups are attempting to flag SMS carriers' false information campaigns that are driving misinformation on vaccines." So again, not that comforting. We still don't know any information on this. What we know is it's not outside the realm of possibility that they are going to start censoring our emails and our text messages. It was already alarming. It has been extremely alarming that they have been censoring our YouTube videos, our Twitter tweets, our Facebook posts, all of this. So none of this is, all that unbelievable. It's unfortunately very believable and extremely scary. So, however, one thing, in order to kind of tie this all in together, the government might not be the ones actually doing the censoring yet. Right? It's these allied groups. But if these allied groups are doing it at the behest of the government, so when Congress calls in these allied leaders, these allied group leaders like Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, and they sit them down and they grill them for hours on end in congressional hearings, what is that exactly if that is not government pressure to censor? If that isn't government pressure to censor, if that isn't dangling, hey, we could be regulating you harsher, we could be making your life miserable because you're making our life miserable by not censoring the text messages and the information and the videos and the tweets that we want you to censor. I don't know exactly how that isn't an infringement on the freedom of speech. And now we have the Surgeon General, the U.S. Surgeon General, that is a government official, calling for big tech to do more. How is that not government interference in our information, in the information space? So this is all very scary. This is very antithetical to democracy and freedom of speech. This is the type of stuff you read about in the news when they accuse people like Putin or Assad or any of these other brutal dictators around the world, when they say that they are censoring information, that they are limiting journalists, that they are hindering information from being spread throughout their populace that they don't like, information that isn't sanctioned by the government. And we call them out for that. And we demand that they give, and sometimes aggressively and violently demand that they give democracy to their people. And yet, how are we any different today when these government officials are calling for more censorship? Thank you so much for watching the show. Please be sure to subscribe, hit that bell. Also, unfortunately, big tech does censor, but I refuse to be censored. Sign up for my email newsletter, Kim Iverson Uncensored, where you will receive my uncensored videos that I'm not able to post on certain platforms. That link is down below. Be sure to sign up. As I roll out uncensored content, I will be emailing you those links to that information. Information is power. Information is freedom. Thank you so much for watching.